A few years ago, I was approached by Abercrombie& Fitch, no, not to model, but to produce a one-off Christmas-themed single for their chain of stores. So basically, A&F, they wanted original Christmas-themed music, which would be played on all of their stores all around the globe. They were also going to heavily promote all of the songs they would use online, especially using things like their YouTube channel. I don't have to tell you what kind of exposure that would generate for any artist whose song was being used as part of this holiday season in-store campaign. I won't get into the particulars, but they wanted specific styles of dance music. It was a style that none of my electronic artists actually produced. Yet, one name did spring to mind. I knew he could come up with the goods, but more importantly, that this opportunity would be a brilliant and easy vehicle to promote him in the United States, particularly a marketplace that's always been slow to embrace new and different forms of electronic dance music. The artist I had in mind, and I'll call him Tim, recognized what the market wanted and was buying at the time, which dovetailed quite nicely with what the Abercrombie & Fitch brief was kind of demanding, and he created something that harmonized perfectly with that market, even though the song that he came up with was far from the music that was actually inside his heart. He made the practical choice to put aside his desires, put aside his ego and goals, to create a one-off single that Abercrombie & Fitch could use, Aardvark would sell, and would earn him the recognition he needed, particularly in the US, for the type of music he really and truly loved recording. At the end of the day, not only was Tim's Christmas single a hit, 20-something Americans went on to explore his real sound, and he went on to become quite a actual popular name in the American electronic music scene and clubbing scene. Not unsurprisingly, the opportunity also opened other doors for him, and more importantly, dramatically increased his sales, especially in other countries, and all via Abercrombie & Fitch stores worldwide. The revenue his sales generated in these territories allowed us to expand our marketing efforts in the exact same territories where his song had become a hit. There are many lessons to be learned from this example. First, realize that often you must go with the established way of doing things in order to accomplish your goals. You've got to pattern yourself after what is working and then harmonize with the marketplace. Once you have an established reputation, it's easier to try something different than you yourself perhaps may have wanted to do in the first place. So, first you meet the needs of the market to raise the capital you need, and then you go for your dreams. Once you've raised your own funds, you can pretty much do whatever you want. You can pursue a course of action that no one else would believe possible. If you have a concept or idea that seems really too far out of the mainstream, you need to first harmonize with the marketplace. And in some cases, this means a product needs a slightly different twist to work, even though that's not what you perhaps initially envisioned for the product. The change usually involves removing a component, or making the product cheaper, or presenting it in a totally new and simple way. Think Dyson. Think about how Dyson first introduced its revolutionary new design to the marketplace. The execution was simplicity itself. When you're not in harmony with the marketplace just won't respond. It doesn't respond, and it won't respond. Taking a product and making it harmonize with the prospect is simply a matter of good listening and excellent observation. It doesn't take a genius. It takes a good eye and a great ear, and a little intuition it certainly helps as well. It is important that your product harmonizes with or fills the needs of your prospect. If it doesn't, it's up to you to figure out how to change it so that it does. It might mean showing it in a different color, removing or adding an accessory. The point is that the customer is the king. Your goal is to harmonize not only with the marketplace, but in particular with your customer. The desire to belong is a strong psychological and motivational factor in branding, but it's often not appreciated. But think about it. Why do people own a Mercedes? Why do people buy products to get rid of spots, and that would be acne to you non-Brits on the course? Why do certain fads catch on? It could be that these people buy a specific product because they subconsciously want to belong to the group that already owns or uses that specific product. The people who buy a Mercedes, they often want to belong to that special group of Mercedes owners. Do you think it's because of the special braking or suspension system? Forget it. They're going out and spending megabucks to buy something that's maybe slightly better than many of the other automobiles on the market. Other cars can take you to exactly the same places at exactly the same speed, and yet these people, all very intelligent, will go out and spend plenty more to buy a Mercedes. And the list goes on. You name a product that has an established image, and I'll show you a consumer who, somewhere in his or her subconscious value system, wants to belong to the group of people who own that product. Fashion, automobiles, cigarettes, gadgets, whatever the category. The consumer who buys a specific brand has been motivated to buy that brand by virtue of the desire to belong to a group of people who already own that brand. When Volvo discovered that its customer base had one of the highest educational levels of any other car manufacturer, they publicized this fact. They then noticed that when the same survey was conducted a few years later, the percentage jumped even higher. The increase was caused, in my judgment, by the association that other highly educated new Volvo buyers wanted to make with current Volvo owners. They wanted to belong to that group. So some students have said to me, well, what about hermits, yogis, or Trappist priests and nuns? Don't tell me that they have the desire to belong. And my answer has been that they want to belong to the group of people who are hermits, yogis, or Trappist priests and nuns. To identify with the group doesn't necessarily mean you have to be with anyone or be very social. And maybe the key word here is identify. The Mercedes owner wants to be identified with the class or group of people who also owns a Mercedes. The desire to belong to and identify with a group of people who own a specific product is one of the most powerful psychological motivators to be aware of in marketing and copywriting. It's worth remembering we started as a species of hunter-gatherers. Millennia later, we still like to gather. It is a basic, primal, motivating force. It's a potent force to tap into. Let's take music buyers. Enthusiastic buyers of music were my perfect prospects for buying more music. With their permission, they were added to various Aardvark Records email lists. We had a specific list for each of the genres we released albums and singles in. When a new release within a specific genre was forthcoming, we sent out emails announcing that release, which in turn led to inbuilt sales for that release for people who bought that genre of music from us. This is true for many goods, products, and services, from clothing to shoes to books to art. The point is, when selling, whether in print or on TV or the internet, recognize that there is a very large segment of the population who, for whatever reason, has an emotional need to collect a series of similar products. These products bring great joy and satisfaction, and in some cases, utility. One special kind of prospect is the collector. Are you producing something that would appeal to a collector, both professional and the amateur? You would be amazed at the things that are considered collectibles. Just spend a little time on eBay, for instance, to gauge just how huge the collectible market is. I mention eBay specifically as much of the copy you see on eBay is simply awful. Most of the copy I've read that is pitched specifically to collectors is equally awful. All of the copywriting rules we've covered should be applied to your branding messages aimed at this collectibles marketplace. Back in my band management days, I received demos from countless groups. Out of habit, I typically threw the demo cassettes and CDs into boxes. A couple of years ago, I started going through the boxes and found gems from the likes of Skunk Anansie, Blur, Placebo, Muse, and a number of other acts that would go on to become rather famous. The value of these cassettes went beyond the fact that they were tied to famous acts. Most of them had songs that had never been released, or earlier versions of songs that changed before they were actually released. Well, I sold some of these audio cassettes and CDs on eBay, and they didn't do too badly either. Apart from the evident collectability of them, I used all of the slippery slide and emotional triggers of copywriting in each of my eBay auctions. So again, as a powerful psychological motivating factor, don't discount or dismiss human beings' desire to collect. Curiosity is one of the strongest forces in direct marketing. Since people have a natural desire to find out more than what they know, tapping into this trait is one way to increase the effectiveness of your marketing materials. The headlines and first sentences that we write are focused on tapping into that innate curiosity. Whether you're writing a sales letter, website content, or just an email, your headline, or subject line in the case of an email, is arguably the most important factor in determining your prospect's interest level. After all, as your prospect's interest grows, so does their desire to satisfy their curiosity. Copywriting exists to close what's called the curiosity gap, that space between what we know and what we want or even need to know. Looking at it one way, curiosity is a driving force that's often stronger than fear of loss and desire for economic gain. Think Pandora's box. Think Eve. Think Lot's wife turning back to look, even though she knew the punishment was death. Think about every cliffhanger since Scheherazad's 1001 Nights. Think of every reality TV show that cuts to commercial just before the big reveal. Not knowing everything, and specifically not knowing everything yet, is intriguing for people. It's in our nature, this need to basically connect the dots. We need to bridge gaps, which means that clever copy hackers can lure prospects into our sales copy, or deeper into our funnel, or more quickly down that slippery slide with a little dose of strategically placed curiosity. For marketers, using the curiosity gap generally means the following. Introducing something new that our existing knowledge or previous experiences can't explain, similar to cognitive dissonance. And cognitive dissonance is the mental stress or discomfort experienced by an individual who holds two or more contradictory beliefs, ideas, or values at the same time, or is confronted by new information that conflicts with existing beliefs, ideas, or values. A classic illustration of cognitive dissonance is expressed in the fable The Fox and the Grapes by Aesop. In the story, a fox sees some high-hanging grapes and wants to eat them. When the fox is unable to think of a way to reach them, he decides that the grapes are probably just not worth eating, with the justification the grapes probably aren't ripe or that they were sour, hence the common phrase sour grapes. The moral that accompanies the story is, any idiot can despise what he can't get. This example follows a pattern. One desires something, finds it unattainable, and reduces one's dissonance by criticizing it. Starting a story, pausing at a climatic moment, and delaying the conclusion of it. Or another example would be withholding key information for a manageable period of time, but not too long, which can actually deflate curiosity. Or a last example would be introducing an idea, action, or concept, and then connecting it with an unexpected outcome or subject. So what does the curiosity gap look like? Well, here are some from my own practice. I used a headline, "So you think Psytrance is all fluffy bunnies, unicorns, and rainbows." I used this to promote a Psytrance act with a very dark edge. Another one that I used was a strapline, "Didge this," promoting an act where the didgeridoo was the prominent instrument. Another headline where I played with the whole idea of cognitive dissonance was, "So you think MBAs aren't worth the price? You're right." This was for a campaign about how Falmouth's MBA students actually got more than what they paid for. Another headline that played with cognitive dissonance was "Dresses to Die For." This was a campaign promoting Catherine Hamnett's line of ethically and sustainably sourced and manufactured clothing. This campaign ran at a time when the appalling and dangerous conditions of sweatshop labor and child labor used by fashion retailers at the time was very, very prominent in the news. And some last examples, headlines like, "Who really killed the music industry?" And one of my personal favorites, I believe it was run by IKEA, "What your bedside lamps say about you." Cognitive dissonance is a brilliant way and a very effective way of creating a curiosity gap that draws your reader in. You might have already figured this one out. You've almost sold the prospect. The prospect believes in your product or service and is ready to buy. But like many of your customers, this one says, "Well, let me think about it." Well, it's a proven fact that when this happens, chances are the prospect won't buy. And the reasons are really quite very logical. First, in time, that excellent sales message you wrote will most likely be forgotten. Second, if you're lucky and it isn't forgotten, it won't have the same impact it had when it was first read. That old saying, "out of sight, out of mind," certainly holds true in cases like this. Therefore, to avoid the delaying tactic, you've got to provide prospects with an incentive or reason to buy now. In fact, if you do your job right, customers almost have to feel guilty if they don't buy right now. But how do you do it? First, here's what you don't want to do. The prospect has spent a lot of time with your message, and you've convinced him or her to buy. The one thing you don't want to do is to blow your integrity at the very end of the copy by making a statement that's just not true. A statement like, "If you don't respond within the next few days, we'll be sold out," or some other deceit, well, that'll actually turn off the prospect, so be careful. Whatever you say at the end should be the truth and should be crafted to maintain the same integrity that's been expressed throughout your copy. Now, what can you do to provide a sense of urgency? Some copy reeks with a sense of urgency, and nothing really has to be specifically said explicitly. You can also convey a sense of urgency by offering limited editions. You might have a great ad with a good sense of urgency, but a fatal error might still kill your ad's effectiveness. And what's this fatal error? Omitting important information that the buyer needs in order to make that buying decision. Then the buyer has the excuse, "There's a question I have, but I'm too busy to call and find out the answer." Or a simple reason. In short, even a great sense of urgency can be wasted if you leave out some critical information from your copy. You can use the sense of urgency in many different ways: low supplies, closeout opportunities, price rises, product shortages, limited time price opportunities, or limited edition opportunities. How about, "Buy now so you can start enjoying the benefits of my product tomorrow," or even, "Buy one during the next 3 days and you'll get a second one free." Another way to provide a sense of urgency is through your shipping methods. "We'll ship your purchase via FedEx if you order by a certain date." Or, "Since you're one of our customers, you can buy this wonderful product prior to our national introduction if you order by a certain date." The sense of urgency statements always go at the end of your copy. And if there are two critical locations in your copy, they're at the very beginning and at the very end. And it's at the end when the sense of urgency and several other important concepts, well, that's the place where they meet. It must be considered and blended seamlessly together. And some of that other information is how to order and where to order and your contact information. Fear is Another one of those great psychological motivators that will cause us to take an action. Give a person a reason to act based on the fact that they may lose the opportunity to buy something, and they'll usually act in a positive way towards your offer. As just discussed, sense of urgency is an important psychological trigger. A part of the sense of urgency is based on fear. Your customer fears that he or she will lose out on the opportunity of buying a product or service because it won't be available in the future, or it won't be available at the same price. But fear can be a motivating factor in other situations as well. There are products that play to our fear of aging. Creams, lotions, and pills offering a fountain of youth are bought because people fear the aging process and are concerned about what others think of their looks. I'm going to use Malcolm Sutcliffe as an example. Malcolm is an internationally renowned local designer maker of glassware, everything from vases to Christmas tree baubles. Apart from the uniqueness of his design, he does one thing in terms of selling that works for him exceptionally well. He typically produces one-off creations. However, there are times he makes a limited number of a particular creation, like an ornate salad bowl. Say, for instance, he produces 30 units of this particular style of salad bowl. He advertises that on his site. You can actually see how many of this particular item are actually left and available for purchase. And everyone knows that once they're gone, they're gone. No more will ever be produced. Malcolm also adds some nice touches. Each piece comes with a certificate of authenticity, and it shows what number in the production that bowl actually was. Typically, his designs sell out quickly. People fear that if they hang about, there won't be an opportunity to buy one because they will sell out that quickly. And his glassware isn't cheap. As you'll know if you pass by his display windows of his shops in his studio in town. Fear can be a great motivator if it's used carefully in response to some perceived danger of loss that one might have to face. This is a big advantage in retail. Think about it. In a retail store, you can pick something up. You can hold it, touch it, and look it over completely. You can make your decision to buy, and then you can take it home with you, where you can enjoy it and use it immediately. We don't have that advantage on the internet. So to compensate, you should convey to your customer either the advantages in ordering from you online, or the advantage of ordering from you over the phone, or the assurance that you ship promptly and that the customer will have his or her purchase within a few days. The effort by marketing people to provide that instant gratification, in other words, prompt shipping, has made online ordering one of the fastest methods of distribution and has taken a great deal away from the retail industry. I can call a computer company like Dell or Hewlett-Packard and order a laptop on Monday morning and have it in my hand and be using it by Wednesday evening. That's so much easier than running to the store, trying to find a parking spot, finding the right department, and then having to deal with the sales clerk, who may or may not understand my requirements. So, if you have a product and you want to capitalize on the main advantage that a retailer has, find a way to ship your merchandise out quicker, deliver it faster, and provide better service than any retailer could ever offer. Exclusivity, rarity, and uniqueness. These are very strong motivating factors for the right product or the right situation. The concept is to basically let prospects feel that they are special if they buy a particular product. In other words, that they will belong to the very small group that can be envied for owning this very limited item. The emotional appeal of this approach is quite strong. Everyone likes to feel special. Most people would like to belong to a rare group that owns a product that few people can own and enjoy. By limiting the number they produce, some marketing companies have come up with a very strong appeal for consumers. I've already used Malcolm Sutcliffe as an example. The Franklin Mint, a multi-million-dollar business, was built on the premise of a limited edition, first with coins, and then later with everything from plates and cups to model cars and dolls. Anything that you could collect and that they could limit was considered fair game for the mint. The thought behind the limited edition is also to provide value, As people build various collections of things, the objects grow in value if others start collecting the same goods too. Soon, the collections come to the attention of the mass market, and that attracts even more collectors. Then the value of the collections really starts to grow, because remember, each collection is going to be made of a limited edition of something. One of the appeals of an exclusive item is the possibility of extra future value implied by limiting the circulation of that product. Or in other words, it's worth remembering that scarcity sells. I've said it before, and I'll say it again, you must keep your copy simple. I know we've covered some really complicated theories and concepts. However, even though the execution of this in our copy may be difficult, our copy itself should always be easy and simple to read. The positioning of your product must be simple. Your offer must be simple. In short, you want to keep your entire presentation as simple as possible while still getting your message across. There are times when you want to turn something simple into something complex, and we've talked about that one previously. Here, we are looking at the basic psychological motivator of simplicity. So what does this mean in terms of your copy? Well, it means focus. Focus on what you're trying to accomplish and eliminate things that either complicate your presentation or aren't necessary. This doesn't mean you write copy that's so simple a third grader can read it. That's not what I mean by simple. The copy should be able to be read by the less educated people as well as the more educated and still come across clearly. It's not good style to write either up or down for anybody. The use of big words to impress is one example of writing up to somebody. You're trying to impress with your use of words, while somebody else, who might not be familiar with your fancy words, will be utterly lost. Use simple, easy to understand words. Words are, after all, stories, emotional images, each having an impact sometimes greater than what we actually think. Using simple words has the greatest impact. Using words that everyone can understand has a greater impact than words that most people will have difficulty with. And keep your layout simple. Tests have confirmed that things like color bars across an ad, fancy type that is difficult to read, and lines that draw your eyes away from the copy can actually hurt comprehension. Fancy typefaces may look good, but they often give the lowest comprehension scores. Simplicity is a powerful tool. If you have a tendency to complicate things, you're not going to be successful in writing good copy. Be aware of this important point as you decide which typeface to use, how you want to present your product, and the offer you actually want to make. It's always important to relate the product or service you're offering in human terms. How the product will fit, how it will feel, how it will look. These are just some of the ways that you can relate. Now that may seem pretty obvious, but there are other ways that copy or graphics can bring a human element to an advertisement. And let's look at why this is important. As I said before, buying is an emotional human experience where we exchange money for a product or a service. And because we worked hard for that money, the act of buying represents more than just handing over our money. Buying something becomes an emotional event. So first of all, it's about resonating with your prospect. Now we've also called this harmonizing. Now let's consider for a moment a physical device. Let's say specifically a tuning fork. I'm talking about the ones that look like a U-shaped piece of metal. Clang one of the metal times and you hear a vibration. Now let's take two tuning forks, and if they are of the same frequency and you hit just one, the other one will start vibrating even though it didn't come into physical contact with the first one. Taking this experiment one step further, if you take several tuning forks and put them together and hit them all, they will create a harmonic frequency all their own. And if you just happen to know what that combined frequency is, and having a tuning fork that matches that frequency, then it too will start to vibrate in resonance with all the other tuning forks. In creating copy, it's important that you create a condition where your customer, is in perfect harmonic resonance with your copy. The term buying environment should have popped into your head. If you look at all of the elements of copy as a series of tuning forks that must resonate with your reader, you've got a valuable picture of the dynamics that take place during the selling process. Think of the slippery slide as I cover the next bit. One tuning fork might be the headline. Another might be the picture. Another might be the caption. And on to the first sentence, and through the copy to the final offer. In a print ad, the vibrations must be conveyed through the elements in the advertisement. In order to create these positive vibrations, you first must interest the prospect in reading your copy, and then you must really tune in and relate to your prospect. You can add a human element by relating a story in your copy. Stories hold people's interest, and by now that should be ingrained into your brain, especially after SMU101. This technique is the next trigger discussed. Or you can use a byline and write copy in the first person using a conversational tone. This makes your copy a more direct communication from one individual to another. Or you can do things like using humor in a light, inoffensive way that will also develop a relationship with your prospect. The humor can relate a story in a folksy way, or it can bring out the humanness of the person marketing the product or the service. Just remember the rules about humor that we've covered in the previous session. Another approach is to use a picture of a human hand holding a small product. The hand adds size and perspective to what is being presented, and also adds that human element. You can use models. People relate to other people. In a subtle sense, they want to belong to the group of people that are depicted in the picture. Conversely, you don't want to use a picture of yourself if you think some of your readers may respond negatively to it. In short, in your copy, you want to use as many positive human elements as you can without risking any negative vibrations from emotional reactions. And if you do your job right, you do your homework and your research, your copy will have its own vibration, so much so that some people will be able to pick up on that vibration and feel that they almost know you. Again, we've spent an entire unit covering just this topic, so I'm going to only lightly touch on it again here. People love stories, and one of the really good ways to relate to your prospects is to tell a story. Just as a picture is worth 1,000 words, a story can be invaluable and often creates an emotional relationship or bond that keeps your prospect riveted in listening, especially if you craft your story to touch on memory and emotional triggers. Stories create human interests. In childhood, stories read to us by our parents were the way we fantasized or even saw the world. In short, we've been primed for stories ever since we were very young. Think of the public speaker who starts his speech with a story or uses stories throughout his presentation. It makes for an interesting presentation and often holds the interest of the audience, and it also tells us something about the speaker. Think about the stories that I've shared about some of my professional experiences. If you're familiar with the online explosion of TEDx, you know that the power of TEDx is all about the stories. Stories usually have lessons to teach, or experiences to share, or even endings that can excite, surprise, or bring out emotion. And so it is with good copy. If you tell a story in your copy that is relevant either to selling your product, to creating the environment for selling, or to getting the prospect to read your copy, you are using this wonderful and powerful trigger in a very effective way to sell your product or service. Finally, some stories add a unique human element that allows you to relate to and bond very closely with your prospects. My most successful advertising campaigns all use stories as the basis of my presentations. I've given you a few examples with the Satyagraha campaign. When writing copy for your product, think about using a few stories that might be of interest to your prospect and assist in the sale of your product. Things like stories about a new development and how you discovered it. Stories about yourself that would be of interest to your prospects. Timing is also important in the storytelling process. It's nice to start with a story because it holds the attention and engages the prospect. Telling stories is an art form, and using it effectively in branding copy grows with experience. Simply being aware of its potential and its effectiveness is a very good place to start. You'll be surprised at how many stories you'll be coming up with once you actually start putting your minds to it. A good story should capture a person's attention, relate the product or service in the copy, and help you bond with the prospect. Have you ever gone to a movie and known how it was going to end after watching the first few minutes? Or a movie where every action can be easily anticipated? These movies tend not to be very enjoyable. However, the opposite is true when you watch a movie that keeps you in suspense until the very end when it reaches a credible but surprising ending. Any movie that's not predictable usually tends to be more enjoyable unless the audience doesn't feel shortchanged. One of my favorite movies is The Usual Suspects. I thought it was going to be the usual heist movie, but it turned into something much more than that, and the identity of Kaiser Soze was a brilliant twist at the end of the movie. On the other side of the coin, I was a huge fan of the TV series Lost. I watched every episode, and like millions of other people around the globe, when it came to that last episode, I was up in Britain, in this country, at 3 o'clock in the morning, just to watch that ending. And to say that I was furious because I felt as though I had been cheated was a bit of an understatement. So it was also worth bearing that one in mind. So what forces in our minds make us perceive one movie as a lot better than another? Well, Sugarman has a pretty good theory. The more the mind must work to reach a conclusion that it eventually successfully reaches, the more positive, enjoyable, or stimulating the overall experience. I'm going to say that again. The more the mind must work to reach a conclusion that it eventually and successfully reaches, the more positive, enjoyable, or stimulating the experience. And this is true for copywriting. Copy must have the whole brain appeal. If it doesn't, the copy will ultimately fail in its purpose. Now, there are 4 parts to the human brain. I'm not going to go into details about what they are or where they actually reside in the brain. Some brain researchers suggest that human beings experience the most pleasure when all of these parts of the brain are engaged in agreeable levels of stimulation and activity. The 4 brain parts control thought, intuition, sensation, and emotion. There's an article that suggests that advertising that pleasurably engages the senses, emotions, and thought processes, as well as our kind of what you would call innate intuition, they tend to be the most successful. Advertising that merely grabs the attention of the senses will tend to be only temporarily attractive. Let's look at how whole brain advertising applies to writing effective advertising copy. If you make your copy too obvious, the reader feels either looked down on or they're bored. Provide a little suspense so that the reader has to come up with a conclusion on their own using their intuition, thought, sensation, and emotion, and you've got a very good force working for you. So I'm going to leave you to mull that one over for a little bit. I'm going to use this print ad as an example. Read the copy, and I suggest at the end of what I have to say, pause the video and kind of think about the points that I raise. Note what I didn't say, but was rather still obvious in this ad. No, it's not price. Remember, music is one of those weird products that's universally priced. Anyone seeing this ad would have known that the album, in a single track downloads, would have the same price as any other bit of music or an album in the domestic marketplace. Read the quote again to see if you pick it up. Give up. What I didn't say was that the music was upbeat, or the album had a classic album feel. I didn't have to say it. Yet, the readers could come up with their own conclusions all by themselves, using their intuition, thought, and emotion. Had I made it too obvious by adding a line, "a classic for our time," it wouldn't have been as powerful. The mind had to work a little to reach a conclusion through its own thought processes. This is a very subtle but powerful concept. It's the difference between talking down to prospects and making prospects feel you're talking directly to them. and is one of the most difficult theories to understand, and there is a great deal of reading about this available for you in the reading room. To get a better appreciation for the theory, think back in your life to times when you had to work hard to achieve something, and how much more you appreciated what you had actually achieved. I remember all the work I had to go through to get my master's in higher education. It was 2 years of hard work and hard study, not to mention the expense. But when I finally held that diploma in my hand, it was a bit of a thrill. In contrast, when I took a short course to mentor new lectures, it was simple. There really wasn't that much study, and within a few weeks I'd passed. Sure, I was proud that I'd successfully completed the course and passed, but nowhere near as proud as I was of actually getting my MA in higher ed. Working hard for a successful conclusion results in a great deal of personal satisfaction. The same holds true for the mind in the thinking process. Anything that causes the mind to work to reach a conclusion creates a positive, enjoyable, or stimulating effect on the brain. The opposite is true if the mind doesn't have to work because the conclusion is obvious. You appreciate that sale to a difficult client a lot more than a sale to a client that's a pushover and takes only a minute. When a very difficult product is given to me to sell and I'm successful, I get great pleasure from the achievement. But give me a really easy product, something that's already in demand, and I just don't have that same feeling of satisfaction. It's worth remembering that vague descriptions encourage thinking. Great fiction writers don't go into great detail when describing how handsome or beautiful a character is. They use general terms, and they let his or her reader imagine the male or female characters. If you make your intentions too obvious, the prospect will feel either patronized or bored, making the prospect think in order to come to a conclusion, and you create a very stimulating mental effect. Too often, we write too much. We reveal too much of the pitch without allowing the prospect's mind and intelligence to become engaged. Simply realizing how this powerful psychological trigger works will help you craft copy that basically causes your prospect's brains to experience an enjoyable and stimulating time by allowing them to reach on their own the conclusions that you wanted them to reach in the first place. Guilt can be a powerful motivator. Charities, not-for-profits, and NGOs regularly use the guilt factor in their brand messages. Their use is pretty overt. There are, however, subtle forms of guilt deployed in brand messages, which I'll cover in a minute. Guilt is one of the psychological factors that I've tended to avoid. Actually, I've gone out of my way to avoid it. It really hasn't been applicable for the brands I've handled, so for me, it was a device best left alone. Guilt-centered copy can be a dangerous thing. It can backfire in spectacular fashion. As a device, it should always be used, if at all, sparingly and well. In a world filled by guilt-centered messaging from countless brands, audiences, they've also become more or less immune to the style of messaging. We all feel guilty about something, whether it's a lack of time with the family or failing to recycle. But for marketers, guilt can be a very desirable emotion as it's an effective way to attract consumer attention, sell products, or even change the way that people behave. One example of a brand that's been tapping into Britain's inner guilty consciences, rather than fear, is the Central Office of Information, otherwise known as the COI. Long-established players in the advertising field have been arguing that the government advertising division has been using the power of guilt to motivate consumers to change their behavior. For example, a recent anti-smoking ad featured children appealing to their real-life mums and dads to give up the habit, while a binge-drinking ad asks, "You wouldn't start a night like this, so why end it that way?" Both use consumers' guilty consciences about their bad behavior to encourage them to change. And by bad behavior, let me qualify that by saying society's perception of bad behavior. However, the COI has moved to pretty much stop using fear as a motivating factor because it just doesn't appear to jolt people into action. And why is that? Fear tends to have the side effect of disempowering the person who sees it. So they can be very powerfully affected, but lose their sense of urgency. They think, this thing is so terrible that I can't do anything about it, so there really is no point in acting. Instead, the COI has created advertising that emphasizes the positive benefits in its anti-smoking and drinking campaigns. Other brands are also unconvinced that making people feel guilty to sell products is really the right strategy. Founder of Skinny Candy, Sahar Hashimi, thinks a more powerful message is to help consumers avoid feeling bad altogether by providing a guilt antidote. Oh, we still see guilt used for snack foods aimed at the weight-conscious people, things like Aero, Ryvita, oat bars, and the like. This guilt avoidance tactic is often used by diet brands which market their wares as guilt-free options. The messaging ranges from blatant to the sublime in terms of negative associations around eating. As I mentioned earlier, charities, however, continue to use guilt to encourage more donations. A sad-eyed child with a tagline, "Just three pounds can change a life," is a tactic used on a regular basis in non-profit marketing, from animal rights organizations to children's advocacy bodies. But some charities, such as Save the Children, are moving away from these types of campaigns. Instead, donors are being motivated to give by encouraging them to track how their money is being used to make positive changes in the world, through video updates and the charity's websites. Gym brand Virgin Active has also come around to this way of thinking. While price-led promotions to get people signing up to battle the bulge after Christmas or before the annual summer holidays are the norm in the usual health club sector, Virgin is taking a completely different approach. The brand wants its gyms to be used as part of a positive lifestyle. Rather than making people feel guilty about joining a gym in January and then failing to attend for the rest of the year, he wants to encourage people to see the gym as a part of a positive lifestyle. Using guilt can be effective if the subject matter is right. United Utilities has just launched a campaign using a sewer monster character to tell consumers not to put the wrong kinds of things down a toilet or a sink. The aim of the campaign is to educate consumers, but also to make people feel guilty about not taking the right course of action. Again, using guilt to change behavioral patterns or to educate. However, if you want to sell a product rather than an idea, then playing on positive emotions is more often than not more effective. And it's more effective in getting people to part with their cash than making them feel bad about themselves. Being specific in your explanations is very critical and can establish your credibility. First, let me give you an example. If I were to say something like, "New dentists everywhere use and recommend Cap Snap toothpastes," well, it sounds like typical advertising lingo, all puffery, designed to sell a product. It's so general that'll probably cause a viewer to discount the statement I've just made, and maybe everything else I say after that. It's definitely before it. But if I were to say something like, 92% of new dentists use and recommend Cap Snap toothpaste, it sounds much more believable. The consumer is likely to think that we did a scientific survey and that 92% was indeed the result. When people perceive certain general statements as puffery or typical advertising babble, those statements are at best discounted or accepted with some heavy doubts. By contrast, statements with specific facts can generate strong believability. If you're describing a product that's designed for circulatory functions of the body, you can talk about 242 miles of blood vessels instead of miles of blood vessels. When you talk about the bottom of your feet, instead of saying there are a lot of nerve endings at the bottom of your feet, you can say there are 72,000 nerve endings at the bottom of your feet. You're stating a fact as opposed to a general or vague statement. It's making you more believable. There's one other benefit to being specific. By being specific, you sound like you're an expert on your product. You've really investigated it, and you're very knowledgeable about it. And this too builds trust and confidence, which is kind of where we started at the beginning of this session. People in general are very skeptical about advertising and often don't believe many of the claims stated in ads. But when you make a specific claim using the exact facts and figures, your message is much more credible and often more trusted. Brand messaging as an old friend. If somebody's reading a magazine and sees your advertising format, something they've seen many times before, and recognize your logo or company name, there is a feeling of familiarity. The same is true of online formats. They see a friend in an environment of foreign advertisers, and to them, you are not foreign. You are familiar, and as a result, there is an attraction to your offering. Advertise enough times or sell a product whose name is familiar to your prospect, and you will create the same attraction. That is why brand names are so important. That's why the familiarity of a buying environment is also important. At Aardvark, our sales were always buoyant, especially amongst our core niche fans. In short, our releases were well known to the consumer. Each time we released a new project to a familiar buying environment, the combination of brand name, familiarity, and familiar selling environment caused an immediate buoyant purchasing activity. The words familiar and familiarity, they have the word family in them. People feel most comfortable within their own family, usually. They feel confident and trusting and allowing themselves to be more vulnerable. So it is with anything that people are familiar with. They trust the brand's name. They're more confident that they're buying the right product, and they're more inclined to do so. One of the biggest mistakes traditional advertisers make is to kill campaigns they've been using for a long time just because they're tired of them. For example, Fly the Friendly Skies of United. Another one is You Deserve a Break Today at McDonald's, are but two examples, familiar to consumers. In addition, consumers often sang along with these commercials. Too often, in traditional advertising, the client gets tired of the commercial long before the public does. In marketing, a decision to drop a commercial approach isn't arbitrary. You keep running your product or service ad until the public tells you when to stop by virtue of lower sales. The orders simply stop coming in, or you've replaced your ad with something that pulls more response. Good marketing technique calls for continually revising or tweaking your brand's message until it gets better, but you never drop a campaign because you're tired of it. Drop it only when the public stops exchanging their money for your product or your service. Now, the traditional agencies will tell you something like, well, we asked a focus group what they thought about your slogan, and they said that they were getting tired of it, so we're going to pull it. This is a major fallacy as well. There is no real way to test the effectiveness of a commercial except by virtue of sales. Focus groups only tell you what they think you want to hear, and not how they would actually act themselves. If the product isn't selling, then look at the campaign. Maybe it isn't even the campaign, but rather the competition or some other element in the marketing mix. The next point is about using familiar words. And yes, I know I've covered this in the simplicity bit, but we're going to revisit it quickly again. There are certain words that are more familiar to most people and to the human consciousness. For example, if you ask somebody to give you a number from 1 to 10 right off the top of their head, chances are the number 7 will be chosen more often than any other number, often dwarfing the next popular choice. Therefore, using the number 7 in a book title such as The 7 Ways to Improve Your Relationships or The 7 Spiritual Laws of Success is utilizing the most common and familiar integer of the first 10. You're therefore vibrating with the familiar and harmonizing with your reader. Ask someone for a color off the top of their head, and the answer will probably more than likely be red, the majority of the time. Ask them to name a piece of furniture, and the answer will likely be chair. There are familiar words that can create a very subtle harmony with your reader, and it's up to you to find them and to use them. Where do you find them? Many books have been written on the effective use of words that really draw an excellent response. Books by David Ogilvy or John Caples are excellent ones to read. I've added some in the reading room. There are also some powerful words such as sale or free. And then there are the not so obvious words, the ones that relate specifically to your product in which you, as a passionate devotee of your product, inherently should already know. Finally, there are words that aren't in your own consciousness and aren't singled out in any books, but will be discovered only by testing. Sometimes changing just one word in a 1,000-word ad will double the response. As a copywriter, be aware of the powerful force of familiarity to make a person comfortable with your product or service. Realize the importance of a familiar brand name, a logo that appears many times and becomes well known, a layout that people instinctively know is yours, familiar phrases, but not cliches, and words that your public can harmonize with. All of these reinforce the bond that familiarity creates between you and your prospect. Hope can also be a great motivator in the buying process. Women, and now increasingly men, buy new face creams that offer the hope they will make a difference in their wrinkles. An intense golfer buys a new golf ball that offers the hope that it may take only a few strokes off a golf game. In short, there is an implied possibility that using a product or service will provide a future benefit. The future benefit isn't assured, nor is it guaranteed. It is a dream, a fantasy, or at the very most, a possibility. The hope replaces the reality of an already delivered benefit, or a guarantee that you may receive when you buy other products such as a radio or a computer. When using the psychological trigger of hope, you must avoid the trap of making a specific claim that can be measured or guaranteed. You want to allude to what the product is used for, without making any promises of an exact outcome, unless an exact outcome can be guaranteed. There are other products people buy repeatedly, just on hope. Let's take vitamins, for example. Can people tell if taking vitamins makes a difference in their health? Yes, some can. Interview a bunch of people and they'll swear that vitamins are making a difference. Capture those interviews on TV and they're very impressive. Then prospects, impressed with the results shown on TV, start buying the product and continue to buy it regularly with the hope that it's making a difference in their lives. But the key here is not to make a specific promise, but rather to imply results through testimonials. So how does this apply to selling in print and on the internet? There are some products that are sold using hope as a strong motivational tool. You need to determine the nature of your product and find something that you can imply about a future result without stating a specific guarantee, particularly if you want to stay in business for any length of time. Many product categories lend themselves to the power of hope. The entire health food industry is a good example, including vitamins, food supplements, and even brain enhancers. Lowering your golf score, finding a new relationship, preventing wrinkles, and pressing your date, all are good opportunities to recognize the psychological trigger of hope at work. One aspect to focus on when you're creating an ad using the power of hope is credibility. If you present yourself as a credible person representing a credible company, then what you say will elicit a feeling of confidence on the part of your prospect. Then, whatever you say your product did for you or for your previous customers will be taken as a possibility for your prospect. And the power of hope will compel your prospect to order, and if they're satisfied, reorder. It might be a book on relationships and how the information changed your life and the lives of your previous readers. It might be a formula you take to live a long life and how wonderful you feel. Whatever you're selling, with the proper credibility, you will automatically engage the power of hope in order to sell. Okay, so to wrap things up, this session is very important in your understanding of the underlying reasons why people buy. Many of the psychological triggers to buying may not have been obvious to you before. Nevertheless, an awareness of each of these points will give you a tremendous boost in becoming a great copywriter. So as with the other sessions, I invite you to engage with the scenarios, work your way through the template that accompanies this session, and definitely investigate the subject further through all the reading available in the reading room. And I will see you in the next session.